Hello everybody and welcome to the N64 beta project. This is a show where we take a look at the unreleased games, tech demos and prototypes for the Nintendo 64. Now when the N64 was first announced, there was a huge scramble to bring as many old retro games and give them 3D remakes and bring them out on the new 64-bit hardware. This brought some absolutely fantastic games such as Robotron 64, but also some really terrible ones such as Hyper Asteroids. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at one of these old school retro games getting the 3D remake and find out the story about what happened to it. Let's jump into today's episode. Back in 1997, Frogger was released on the PlayStation 1 and PC. It was poorly received by critics, but the sheer nostalgia factor helped propel the game into some pretty decent sales figures. On the PC alone, it shifted 1 million copies in just 4 months. It seems gamers loved the 3D updated graphics and the new moves that were included in the game. With the Frogger series seemingly back on gamers' radars across the globe, it was a sure thing that a sequel would begin development. Frogger 2: Swampies Revenge was released in the year 2000 on the PC, PlayStation 1, Dreamcast and Game Boy Color. Now if you're a regular viewer of this series, you'll quickly realise that there was indeed a Nintendo 64 version planned, and that brings us to the topic of today's video. Frogger 2 on the Nintendo 64 was due to be published by Hasbro Interactive and developed by Interactive Studios alongside the other versions of the game at the same time. However, the game was cancelled and the N64 was left without amphibious goodness. The game was actually previewed at a very early stage by the media, who could see no reason that this was not going to be released on the N64. After all, Frogger 1 had been a nice revenue earner for the publishers, and getting Frogger 2 on as many consoles as possible was a surefire way to increase this further. IGN actually ran a full preview of the game, where they pointed out it seems many retro games were getting the positive 3D remakes, and Frogger 2 was a game they were looking forward to getting. They also noted that it was being developed by the same team which made the quirky Glover on the N64, and this would be their follow-up title to that game. The game was due to feature 3D polygonal engine built from the ground up, 6 unique and varied worlds, a huge dose of humour and interactive powers for Frogger, and it would also contain the classic version of Frogger as a bonus. Being an N64 title, it would also feature a 4-player mode which I personally was looking forward to, as I used to play multiplayer games with my family on the console quite a lot. So with all this positive coverage from the media, you'll be asking why this was never released. With this game it's hard to get a definitive answer, so I'm going to run my theory over you, and I think it's as close as we may ever get to the correct answer. You see, Frogger 2 for the N64 was going to be a totally different game than the version which was going to be released for the PlayStation 1, Dreamcast and PC. With the developers having a totally unique game to make, it would have been increasingly difficult for them to deliver a game to Hasbro which they would have been happy to release. Frogger 2 was actually in development for a very long time. The N64 version was previewed and announced at the same time that Glover was announced. Personally, I believe that the British developer wanted to make the game totally 3D. However, their resources were poured into getting Glover onto shelves, which meant that Frogger was put on the back burner. Then, when Glover was finished and published, they returned to Frogger 2 and realised just how difficult it had been to make Glover in full 3D, and so they decided to restart the game in 2.5D style along the lines of the PlayStation and Dreamcast versions. Then sales figures started to come in for Glover, and they were better than expected. It was by no means a smash hit, but the fans seemed to enjoy the interesting game mechanics of it, and Hasbro definitely wanted to create an IP, so they ordered work to begin on a sequel. That's my theory anyway. If you've got any theories, let me know in the comments below, and maybe we can get to the true answer as to why this was never released. As always, let's take a look at how and why this game is now playable. Well, in November 2011, a prototype cart went up for sale on eBay. What was interesting about it was that it was an NTSC cart, and it sold for a cool £1,000 British and was being sold by a Portuguese seller. There was an alpha version of the game already dumped and available online, which is another cool thing about Frogger 2 on the N64. There are actually 2 different prototype carts available. The cool thing about this version is that not only does it contain the classic version of Frogger, but it also has the developer's debug menu. This is kind of the jackpot, as for gamers it may not be very interesting, but for those of us who like game development, it gives you the option to delve deeper into the game's creation and mechanics and mess around with them, such as the models and settings. This would not have been available in the final release of the game, so having it here is pretty damn cool. Now the version that you've been watching is a more complete version, however there is also what appears to be a demo or competition cart, and you are watching the footage of this now. It is unclear as to why this cart even existed, but I expect that it was either to demo to the publisher to show how development was progressing, or it was used in a small contest, possibly at an expo event. Either way, it's pretty cool to have two different versions. The one you're watching now is very similar to the game, which was actually released as Frogger 2 Swampies Revenge on various platforms. In closing, it's a shame that the unique version of Frogger 2 was never released on the N64. I think it would have had a limited market and appeal, but if they did go down the 3D route, it would have been an interesting platform puzzler. And even in the top-down mode which we saw in a more developed version, it would have been an interesting budget title for the console. So what are your thoughts on Frogger 2 for the N64? Do you think it would have bought this back in the day, or was it destined to be a budget title? Would you have preferred a fully 3D Frogger experience, or would you have been happy with a game similar to the Frogger 2 version which was actually released later consoles? Which of the two prototype versions did you prefer? Let me know in the comments below, and whilst you're there, please hit that thumbs up button to let me know you want more episodes of the N64 beta project. Until next time.